Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we have got a lot to talk about here on this week's episode of Journey to the Draft. And really, it starts with some outstanding matchups to get through in college football. Before we get there, though, I was really happy to welcome back to the show Assistant Director of Player Personnel here with the Eagles, Ian Cunningham, for our Scout Story segment. Really enjoying having this segment into the fold here, where we've done it over the last few weeks. We catch up with an Eagles scout or personnel man to talk about a current Eagles player when they were coming out of college, and maybe just some overall big picture takeaways that we can apply moving forward to each of our own processes when trying to project these players. So this week, Ian Cunningham joins the show to talk about Eagles defensive back Jalen Mills, and we'll talk all about that at the top of the show in Scout Stories. After that, we'll get to this weekend's action here in Saturday Scouting. Myself, Ben Fennell, Dane, Brugler. We'll get all of our reactions from more Big Ten, more SEC. Lot to talk about here this week with Saturday Scouting. Then we're going to go on the clock with Chris McPherson. He's back for another debate here. He's going to moderate another debate between Ben, Dane, and I. Excited for this week's conversation. Then we'll wrap it up with a question from you guys at home with our draft mailbag. As always, the best way to throw us your support, and you guys have been great with it so far, but really want to help really promote this even more. The more that you guys are able to go on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us comments, rate the show. If you leave a question, we'll answer it here, but just the act of doing that, as more and more fans around the NFL are becoming more and more interested in the NFL draft process because we're getting later in the season, fan bases are starting to steer their eyes towards the spring. The more you guys are able to do that, our hardcore listeners, if you go on, you leave that rating, you leave that comment, we're going to make ourselves available for more listeners, more subscribers, and it just helps this show stay afloat. So really appreciate everybody that has gone on and done that. Again, just go on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, leave a rating, leave a comment. Really the best way to help us out. Really appreciate everybody that has done that already. That being said, let's get to the top of the show. It's time for Scout Stories.
Pull up a seat. It's time for Scout Stories.
Well, happy to be joined this week by Eagles Assistant Director of Player Personnel, Ian Cunningham. And Ian, thanks so much for joining us, man, to talk about Eagles defensive back Jalen Mills. And I say defensive back because obviously he's played a number of different roles throughout the course of his career here with the Eagles. Interested to get your thoughts on him when you scouted him during his time at LSU.
Hey, Fran, it's interesting enough, he had the same type of career at LSU as well. If you remember his first few years, he played corner at LSU and then moved to safety as a senior. And then as a senior, he was hurt for about 5 games that year with, I believe, a broken leg. So the evaluation process with him coming out, he kind of had to pick and choose what you wanted to watch. You had to watch him at safety as a senior. You had to watch him at corner. It was a little bit unfair to him just to watch him at safety as a senior because he was banged up. But that versatility you loved his competitiveness. They spoke glowingly about him as a competitor on the practice field. You see him in games, the same types of things that we see at NovaCare on a day in, day out basis. He did in Baton Rouge as well. So his career at LSU was very similar to what it's been here for us in Philadelphia.
Talk to me about his Senior Bowl. And I feel like if I remember right, he played corner at the Senior Bowl, right? So when you see that and he's like, all right, you saw the 3 years at corner early in his career. He makes that transition to safety. He spent some time in the inside as well. And then he goes to the Senior Bowl and gets back at corner. Does that help you in terms of the evaluation? Say all right, he can still play on the perimeter against some of the best, his peers coming out in the senior class?
No doubt. It does help, especially at the Senior Bowl, because he's playing against the best of the best. And granted, he's playing against the best of the best probably in practice at LSU, right? So, but just to see him at corner at the Senior Bowl, he had arguably one of the better weeks that week in Mobile. He picked off several passes in every practice. He sat on routes. You saw the competitiveness, the same things in which you saw at practice at LSU. That competitive spirit, that toughness you saw on the practice field in Mobile as well. And I'm sure there were a lot of scouts trying to go back and change a couple of their reports because he was arguably the best in show that week down in Mobile.
And then the last question about Jalen was, when you look at it, just kind of bringing this big picture, for fans, they're looking at it maybe for their team, or maybe they're looking at it for all 32 teams. When you have a player with that level of versatility in the secondary, especially in today's league, with the positionless football, how do you, as a fan on the outside, how hard is it to try and say, like, project what this guy can be? Because all 32 teams may look at him in different ways.
You hit the nail on the head. It is positionless football now, and you kind of grade him for what he can do and what you believe he can do. What he can do on the football field, what you see him, how it's going to transfer over to our level. I think really with like a player like Jalen is that versatility to be able to play safety, be able to play corner, be able to play nickel or star, whatever position it may be. That versatility is huge, especially with our defense and several defenses in the NFL. So having a player like that is great to have on your side.
Well, Ian, thanks so much for joining us this week to talk about Jalen Mills. Again, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll talk to you again soon, man.
You as well.
So a couple of big takeaways there from our chat with Ian. Number one, the importance of events like the Senior Bowl and what guys can do to help themselves at these All-Star games. We talked about last week, the big news with the East-West Shrine Bowl, unfortunately, canceling the 2021 game due to COVID-19. And that's going to have a big impact on a lot of players. And the Eagles have had a lot of success finding players at the East-West Shrine Bowl. Most recently, Avonte Maddox was a guy that had gone down there. Hopefully the Senior Bowl, and it seems like all signs are pointing to them being able to get that event off the ground here in a couple of months. But the Senior Bowl is just so important. It really, what it does, as Ian said, you're looking at a player that now it's an apples to apples comparison, right? Because it's not just you're seeing them, going up against the best of the best on their schedule, but now they're going up against all their peers, all the other top seniors and draft eligible upperclassmen in the class, right? So I think when you see those players shine in that forum, in that arena, we've seen guys like, Brandon Graham was another great example. And we talked about that a couple weeks ago with Anthony Patch. What BG did down in Mobile back in 2010 really helped himself going into the pre-draft process. And it shows, hey, like this guy has what it takes to handle the top level competition that he's going to be able to see. That absolutely helps. And then also, not only that in terms of like performance, but also you get to see, all right, well, who are the guys, maybe you can answer some questions. Jalen Mills was one of those guys. He played safety late in his career with LSU, but maybe can he play corner? And I think when he went to the Senior Bowl, showed he can play corner against the other big receivers in this class. I think that gave the Eagles a little bit more confidence that early in his career he can play corner, and he ended up winning a Super Bowl as a starting corner with this Eagles defense. So I think when you look at those scenarios, that certainly helps. I can tell you right now, a lot of teams, a lot of decision makers, scouts, they are looking for who are the guys that go down to those events and compete, because it's a lot about competition. So obviously a lot of guys will bow out for injury or for one reason or another, but seeing the guys that go down and compete every single day, that improve from day 1 to day 4, that obviously has a big swing as well for these guys. So if you see a guy come out, have some early struggles as he gets his feet wet a little bit, and then day 2, day 3 gets better and better, that always will weigh heavily on the minds of decision makers as well as they move through the pre-draft process. So the Senior Bowl, very, very important. And then the other big thing, just the last topic we hit on there, the decision about positionless players. And we talk about this all the time. And it's funny, I just retweeted a promotional tweet we did last year, right around this time, about Isaiah Simmons from when he was at Clemson. And we talk about this a lot when it comes to these quote-unquote positionless players, because it is a part of today's game. There's no debating that. You need guys that can do lots of different things on defense. If you're going to have a level of success, if you're going to match up to what most offenses are going to give you right now in terms of all the different versatile pieces that they've got at running back, receiver, and at tight end, well, you need guys that can match that on the defensive side. So whether it's a cornerback, linebacker, a nickel safety, all the different, obviously along the trenches, the defensive end, defensive tackles. So all these guys that can do different things are very, very important. That being said, all 32 teams are going to view that player very different. So I think when you look at, the examples I brought up, Isaiah Simmons, you look at Miles Jack, Jabril Peppers, who's now with the Giants. I mean, he was a good example of that. Certainly last year, Kyle Duggar, Jeremy Chin, all these guys, all 32 teams, some teams might look at it and say, yeah, this guy would fit great for us as a pure free safety. We're not going to ask him to do anything else. Some people say, hey, you know what? I'm going to ask him to play. You look at Jeremy Chin in Carolina. He's going to play off the edge. He's going to play as a stacked linebacker. We might play him at safety. We might have him match up out wide. He'll play a little bit in the slot. You might see him as a guy that can be that versatile chess piece. You might see a guy as a pure box player. all teams, all schemes are going to view him differently. So for all of you that are listening at home that like to project players, just remember that as you're watching these players coming out of college, that just because you see them one way, keep in mind how they might be seen differently by other teams and other schemes. So I think that's an important part of the process just to keep in mind, is that all 32 teams have the potential to look at guys a little bit differently. And that's not just the defensive positionless players. That's running backs and receivers. You look at like Antonio Gibson coming out last year. Some teams saw him as a back. Some teams saw him as a receiver. Offensive line. Some people might say, oh, this guy's a center. This guy's a left tackle. This guy's a right guard only. Oh, he could play all three interior line spots. Everybody's going to see all these players differently, and it's what makes this process so fun. So great stuff there from Ian Cunningham. Hope you guys have enjoyed this segment. Again, I think this was our 4th or 5th one. Hope you guys have enjoyed that here on a weekly basis now on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Now, let's get into this week's action here. It's time to welcome in Ben Fennell and Dane Brugler. Let's get into some Saturday scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, well, like I said, let's talk about this past week's action. And before we get into the biggest games and the biggest standouts, we want to get to some of the big news as I welcome in Ben Fennell and Dane Brugler. Guys, look, I would say that there is no bigger news than the news that rocked the college football world late last week, right after, it was literally the night that we posted the last episode of the week, and that was the news that Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence tested positive for COVID-19. He did not play against Boston College, will not play this weekend against Notre Dame. So obviously that matchup, I don't want to say loses a little bit of the luster, because it makes the game, I would say, even a little bit more intriguing. We'll see what happens. But before we talk about the rest of Clemson, because we were going to talk about that game a little bit later in the show, Dane, I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts on what this means for the college football playoff picture. And do you kind of view, this is, how is the committee going to view this if Clemson does lose to Notre Dame on Saturday?
Yeah, and I think, first of all, we have to point out it's a pretty big if, because the way that DJ played, and that's all, I'm not going to try his last name, it's just DJ.
I got us covered for later. Okay.
The freshman quarterback, the way he played against BC, Clemson looks like they're in decent hands moving forward. But if they were to lose, things will really get interesting. It would put Notre Dame in the driver's seat in the ACC and set up a potential rematch between the two teams in the ACC championship game in December. So the committee has said before that they take injuries into account when they rank these teams and have discussions. So a loss to Notre Dame doesn't really knock Clemson out of contention because, we assume they would treat Lawrence's absence as, just the same as if he had a sprained ankle and couldn't play in that game. So if Notre Dame and Clemson finish their seasons both one loss, and the one loss being to each other, good chance the ACC could get two teams in, presumably with Alabama and Ohio State. So we still have a lot of football left to play. We'll see what happens this Saturday, but a Notre Dame win would definitely shake things up.
And that's the thing, is that I feel like if Notre Dame wins Saturday and then they do have that rematch later in the season, the ACC title game, Trevor Lawrence plays, Trevor Lawrence wins, even if if that playoff spot is in the balance, I feel like it would be Clemson that would get the nod, as they would have the later win and the win with Trevor Lawrence.
Either of you guys have any takeaways from the Clemson Boston College game from over the weekend?
I do. We're gonna go. I actually have a couple of players that I want to talk about, and we'll talk about it a little bit here on the show. I don't want to give away too much.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll talk about some of those guys. But to me, the other big thing, and look, this goes without saying, we all hope that Trevor Lawrence it gets better soon. Hopefully, apparently he said the symptoms are mild so far. Hopefully it stays that way, and hopefully he can return to action here soon. We all hope that there is no long lasting effects with Trevor or anybody else that's COVID-19 positive. So huge news, and talking about it. It was funny. I was texting with Ben on Thursday night as that news came out, and one of the things we talked about was, I kind of wondered was, does this open the door for other players who are maybe on the fence, that maybe they thought about opting out, or maybe that now that a few games have been played, they put some tape out there for NFL teams to be able to watch, and the season hasn't gone as well for their own respective teams. Maybe now they feel comfortable saying, look, Trevor Lawrence, the best player in college football, Superman in college football, just got COVID. Maybe I ought to kind of take the safe route. I don't want to say that's exactly what Paris Ford, the safety from Pitt, is doing, but I think it kind of opens that door and kind of lets those guys make that decision a little bit easier, and they can sleep a little bit better at night. Guys, interested to get your thoughts. Paris Ford, the talented safety from Pitt, announcing earlier this week that now he will declare for the 2021 NFL Draft and opt out for the rest of the 2020 season. Ben, I know you've watched Paris Ford. Could you give us a quick scouting report on what he brings to the table?
Yeah, he's a 2-year starter for the Pitt Panthers, and they've obviously taken some lumps in their season this year. So I think as they've really removed themselves from contention, guys are making some business decisions, for lack of better words. So Pitt has a lot of NFL prospects on the team. Paris Ford, Damar Hamlin, Jalen Twyman already opted out. Patrick Jones II, Rashad Weaver, defensive ends, highly touted as well. Be interested to see if they join some of these upperclassmen with sitting out the rest of the season. But Paris Ford is more of a box safety, spark plug, runs the alley really well. He's got really good burst speed. He's a fearless player. Put up a couple clips 2 weeks ago against Notre Dame, short yardage, jumping over the pile, really selling out, really type of a guy that will throw his body around, can beat up some tight ends and slot receivers with that physicality, but really interesting box safety with a lot of experience. So I think I've seen enough on tape with this kid that, moving forward the rest of the 2020 season, if he wants to sit out, I wish him luck.
Ben, is it fair for me to say, because I have not done him yet, but just from the profile that I've gotten from talking to you and others, is he like a Bob Sanders type of player, like an undersized safety who just gets after you coming downhill?
Honestly, he reminds me a lot of Jalen Mills.
Really?
Very similar body type in that They're very wiry, they look skinny, but they pack a punch and they play very physical. I know Jalen was a little bit of a corner safety hybrid at LSU, came over and really didn't have a true position in the NFL to start his career.
And Ford started his career corner, didn't he?
Correct, yeah. So that's why I kind of see that similar trajectory there. And I think that's a good type of visual for Eagles fans and ones that certainly know Jalen Mills, had his ups and downs on the outside. But one thing that, everybody believes in Jalen Mills, physical player, good in run support, good blitzer. And that's why his transition to safety has been pretty seamless.
Makes sense. Dane, any takeaways there on Paris Ford?
Well, I'm with Ben where I think I've seen enough where, if he wants to do that, he can. But that's not necessarily a good thing because I don't know. I was not impressed really at all. I liked his physical appetite, but I mean, when he has a run weighted to the ball carrier, he looks like an All-American. But every other time, it's a roller coaster. I mean, there were plays where I flagged him. One was last year against Virginia Tech, and another one was this year, earlier in the season. He had multiple missed tackles on the same play. And it's just he's that type of player because there's ankle biting attempts. He'll slide off the ball carrier. There's times in coverage where he's just flat-footed and a tight end will beat him just out of his breaks. I don't know. He's a highly aggressive player. The tackling technique needs matured. Discipline needs to be improved. I see a guy that kind of reminds me a little bit of another Pitt safety, Jordan Whitehead, who, you love the physical appetite, but he'll make a lot of mental mistakes and, he'll do enough just to, stay around and, have a spot on a roster. But I don't know, the mistakes are just too much. And so I am not much of a Paris Ford fan. But, I was hoping you'd be able to change my mind the rest of the year, but it sounds like we're not going to get that chance.
I don't want to spend too much time on this question, but I want to get your guys' thoughts. Do you think that, obviously this year it's extenuating circumstances, and you understand all these guys that are opting out because of COVID-19, fully understand and not taking anything away from that decision. I do wonder, moving forward after, knock on wood, after COVID-19, after there are vaccines and everybody's in the clear, do you think that this will be somewhat of a new norm in college football where much like the guys that opt out of bowl games, that we'll see guys opt out of their final seasons and not play? Because it's always been kind of like talked about, this guy never needs to play another down after his true sophomore year. Well, now we're seeing that, and we're going to see what happens with those guys if they still get drafted. I feel like once that precedent is set, I wonder how that will impact the 2022, the 2023, the 2024 NFL draft and beyond.
It's interesting because, there's, a guy like Nico Collins, Michigan. He really could have used this year to help himself, especially in another loaded wide receiver class. He decides to opt out. I mean, you just wonder what kind of advice these guys are getting. And so, I do think it's possible where we'll see some some guys opt out, and some will probably be understandable decisions. Guys like Jamar Chase. Other decisions will be very, head-scratching decisions like a Nico Collins who, probably just have the wrong people chirping in their ear. So it's something that unfortunately we'll probably see a little bit more of. But after, hopefully it doesn't happen for a guy like Nico Collins. But if it does not turn out to be successful, then, maybe it's something where, we see teams, well, it didn't work out for him, so maybe I shouldn't do that.
In a collective conversation, we're drafting players with smaller bodies of work. So there's more guessing, more projecting, and more, kind of relying on potential. This reminds me kind of the conversation that the NBA went through when they were taking kids out of high school. Less body of work, obviously high variance of success once they get to the NBA, because you didn't see them against that higher level of competition. Everybody looks good against these high school kids. I think you're just going to have that much greater of a bust factor when they get to the NFL. You may be reaching on a guy, or you may be drafting a Trey Lance off of 17 games as a true freshman or a redshirt freshman. He thinks he's done enough to go to the NFL. He's being touted. And then there's just that little bit of, gray area and, launching him to the next level, and whether he's ready and whether you were able to make a full, assessment on what he's shown as a young player.
I just think it'll be interesting to see how that's handled moving forward with a lot of the big name guys, and we'll see if it becomes more of a theme. One real quick, before we get to this weekend, Matt Zenitz, who does a great job covering Alabama football, broke some news with BYU. The tight end Matt Bushman, who was a senior, was expected to be one of the top seniors at the position here this fall. He got injured in preseason camp, and rather than go back to school next year, take a medical redshirt this year, he is actually going to enter the 2021 NFL draft. So real quickly, Ben, I know that you did him a couple games last year. Just give us a quick reminder on what the NFL will be getting in Matt Bushman.
Yeah, really long, productive player. 6'5", 240. Actually played baseball at BYU as well for a couple of years. But he led the high school tight ends in receiving when he came out. He was a Phil Steele preseason first-team All-American, the independent before the injury. Really good numbers each year at BYU. 500 receiving yards, 500 receiving yards again, 688 last year. He's a tall, long target. I want to say I'm trying to think of a good kind of comp comparison. He's in the Dallas Goedert type of, size, strength, physicality type of role there. But that huge freshman year really, put himself on the radar, and just some injuries last year into this year. Wish we could see him over with Zach Wilson. That offense seems like it's a lot of fun.
Zach Wilson. Watching Zach Wilson at BYU is becoming my favorite Saturday night tradition until the Pac-12 comes back this week. Is 10:30 after all the other games end. It's like, BYU's starting up. Let me watch that. Watch Zach Wilson do some work here for a couple quarters before I go to bed. All right, let's get now into this weekend's action, guys. And we'll get to our first with our game ball, standout players from the weekend. I'll kick things off. And, Ben, you asked, did we have any takeaways from that Clemson-BC game? My game ball is going to go to the running back, Travis Etienne, who became the all-time leading rusher in ACC history, also gets the game-winning touchdown after he sets that record. But I'll tell you guys what. Most of his damage in this game was done in the passing game through the air. And not just that, he also took a kick return on the opening kick of the second half, brought that back to midfield. Clemson was down by 2 scores at the time. I thought he gave that sideline a bunch of juice with that kick return. So Travis Etienne kind of showing off his versatility in this game. Goes for 84 yards, just over 4 yards a carry on the ground, 140 yards, led the team in receiving in this game, and a touchdown through the air as well. So you look at Travis Etienne, to me, he gets my game ball here for this week with what he did against Boston College, helped leading them back in the comeback.
Yeah, it's interesting. Second game this year with double-digit targets. I love how they're featuring him in the pass game this season.
What about the fumble? That didn't.
The fumble. So I looked at that, and after watching all the replays, I felt like that was more on the exchange because they did have a fumble. It was in the I believe it was late first quarter, early second quarter, down on the goal line. That he never had full possession of the ball, and so to me, I'm going to look at that one as that one being more on DJ. We'll get to him a little bit, but DJ gets the fumble. I got to mentally prepare myself before I just jump in. But to me, I'm putting that more on the exchange as opposed to on Travis. I'll tell you this real quickly. Ben, you and I have had a lot of conversations offline. And I've mentioned it here. I have not always been the biggest fan of Etienne going back over the last couple of years. I think that there's a little bit of run to daylight with him, almost like a Saquon Barkley, where he'll have that one big play every game, and then after that, he might average 2 yards a rush. I'll tell you what, watching film of him over the weekend and watching 3-4 games, he's really impressed me this season. I think that he's playing through contact at a much higher rate. He looks more decisive downhill. I agree with you. They're starting to feature him more in the pass game. What's been fun is, he was terrible catching the football early in his career. I remember watching him as a sophomore. He had he had feet for hands. Just could not secure the football through the air. And then last year they made more of a point, more screens, more throws to the flat. This year, you're seeing more wheel routes. You're seeing more of him flexed out wide and running go routes down the sideline, and the quarterback showing faith in him. I've really liked most of what I've seen Travis Etienne this year, more so than all the other years that I have watched him so far, watching Clemson. So that's not like, oh man, like Fran going out on a limb for Travis Etienne, but I'm definitely coming a little bit more around, because I would say I was probably low man on the totem pole for Travis Etienne coming into this weekend.
Yeah, he's played well. And the only reason I brought up that fumble is because it's his third straight game with a fumble. Yep. And so that's something he needs to clean up. But no he's been fantastic this year. There's no doubt about it.
Uyangalele is the quarterback. DJ Uyangalele was that, to me, that's on the exchange. I think he's got to, they just got to clean some things up there. All right, Dane, who is your game ball here this weekend?
So I went with Texas edge defender Joseph Osai. Yep. What a showing on Saturday as the Longhorns upset Oklahoma State in overtime. He finished with 12 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, a forced fumble. He had a walk-off sack in overtime, chasing down Spencer Sanders to end the game. And he beat right tackle Tevin Jenkins on that play, a player who some scouts think is 2nd or 3rd round pick. So I included Osai in my surprise first rounder article a few weeks ago on The Athletic, and he hasn't made me look foolish with that prediction so far with the way he's played. He's so quick off the snap, natural bend, closes with burst. But I think the most impressive part of his game is just the effort. I mean, he is by far the most active defensive player that I've watched for 2021 draft so far. He just doesn't have an off switch. He plays so hard every snap. I think there's a lot of Justin Houston to his ability to win off the edge. So he is a legit game wrecker at the college level.
He plays through contact so well. He gets stuck on his pass rushes, whether he gets belly to belly or maybe misses a hand swipe, and just keeps playing and kind of clawing through. He plays through contact really well. Just glad to see him in that true defensive end role.
Yep.
Last year on 1st and 2nd down, he beat off ball at 6'4", 255. He just looks so out of place, looking like he's really carved out a true fit there at defensive end.
That's what I was most excited to see, what he would look like in this new scheme. He was like a Dante Hightower in the middle of that defense last year, but more so out of place. And now just seeing him be able to come off the edge, pin his ears back, play after play. I'm excited to dive into the film here this year from Joseph Osai. Ben, I know you want to stay in the trenches with another edge rusher here. Who's your game ball?
Yeah, I was expecting a big season from Dalen Hayes at Notre Dame. He's a little slow to start, but a couple of massive weeks, including this past weekend against Georgia Tech. He had 5 pressures, 2 sacks, and a variety of rushes, a bunch of high side rushes where he got that high side corner, bend, flatten, and absolutely smoked the quarterback, one off his blind side, one right in his face. And then a 3-tech mug alignment where he's standing up against the guard, an interior spin move, which you don't see a whole lot, wickedly fast, and got the sack on that play as well too. He's a redshirt senior. He missed almost all last year with a shoulder injury. What came in with the seniors in that class, Khalid Kareem and Julian Okwara, who are off to the NFL. As soon as he got injured in September last year, he said, you know what, I'm coming back. And it's just nice to see him kind of picking this up and, really hitting his stride halfway through the season here. This Notre Dame team is really gaining steam on both sides of the ball, and it seems like they're due for this showdown with Clemson.
He's a guy I've not studied. That Notre Dame defensive line, they've got a number of prospects that I know people are really, really excited about. Guys, let's get to the next category here, our one-play takeaway. Dane, I'll let you kick things off. Who is your one play that you're kind of taking away here from this weekend?
Missouri had no answer for Kadarius Toney on Saturday. Finished with 3 touchdowns. I think the most impressive of which was the just a simple tunnel screen where he just broke multiple tackles, including linebacker Nick Bolton, one of, if not the best tackler in the country. Tony's so elusive because of his quickness, his cuts. It looks like he has rubber ankles with the way he can just stop and redirect. It's crazy. Also has some body power to him. It doesn't look like he does, but he does not allow contact to just take him off his feet. So there are some character stuff there, some medical stuff there. Other questions about usage. So, the interviews are going to be important. The medical evaluation will be important. And then a team has to be convinced that they have a role for him on their offense, probably ideally suited for the slot. So just a very unique player who has a lot of talent to be drafted high.
And I don't think it's something to overlook. Does a lot of his damage over the middle of the field, just like that tunnel screen, running right into the teeth of the defense. He is fearless over the middle, like breaking a tackle of Nick Bolton, who's one of the more feared linebackers in the country. But also goes back to his pedigree as a high school Wildcat quarterback. A lot of between the tackles running in that small frame. He is a tough, fearless player in that 5'10", 190-pound package, that he is a much more physical and fearless player than I think he's going to get lumped into being a slot receiver or scat back or whatever you want to call him.
And that scheme that they ran on that vertical route for a touchdown this past week, that was a wicked route. Just exploded out of that break. It was a good concept, but really kind of put his speed and quickness on display as well.
He's really fearless. No, just real quick on with Tony. He's really fearless, like Ben pointed out. Yep. And that's it's like a double-edged sword, because you do worry about – that's something that Scouts have mentioned to me about the durability, because he refuses to go down. He will bounce off contact, and he is physical for a guy that size, and so you do worry about his body holding up.
Ben, who's your one-play takeaway? Because I know that you had some options here, but I'm excited to get your biggest takeaway here.
Yeah, I was deciding between a couple guys. De'Ami Brown had a bunch of big plays in their loss to Virginia, a couple of nice plays down the field. Davion Nixon at Iowa, this defensive tackle, had 4 sacks. But there's another guy that had 4 sacks. We all know Charles Snowden, the big, long outside linebacker defensive end at Virginia, 6'6", 240 pounds. He looks like Brian Burns or Deion Jordan out there. He had 4 sacks over the weekend in their win against North Carolina. But the context is always important. How did he get those sacks? 3 of them, he was completely unblocked. One was a zone read off play action. One they were trying to boot to his side, and he just pursued it out to the flat. The range, the explosive speed, the length, him chasing quarterbacks from sideline to sideline. Really interesting athlete. However, I don't know if he has true pass rush ability. But I think there's a place for him in the NFL. It just needs to be in the right scheme. So he had the 4 sacks, impressive game, certainly. But I think the context and how he generated those sacks was important.
Interesting. And he's a really interesting player, too, just in terms of the skill set and the projection. I'll go with a guy here that I almost gave my game ball to, and that's Alabama wide receiver Devonte Smith. We talk about him almost every week. 4 touchdowns this week, guys, against Mississippi State. The play that stood out to me, though, the second one of the day, and that made it 17-0 late in the first quarter against Mississippi State. Number one, it was a great route from Devonte Smith. It was a corner post route. You saw the subtlety at the top of the stem, the ability to kind of sell the corner, then break to the post. Great route. Double moves are designed to win, but it's still really, really good route. Number 2, great ball from Mac Jones. Right up the chute again. And Mac Jones was really good again in this game. You look, not just obviously the box score was good, but even just the placement on some of these throws in the deep and intermediate parts of the field. I thought that Mac Jones had another really impressive day. I'm excited to do a deep dive on him and really watch him on film. And then the third element to this was the pass pro from Najee Harris. Ben, I know that this is a play that would really stand out to you. They ran a cross dog blitz, Mississippi State. He did a great job working with the center on passing off the 2 linebackers crossing in the hole, was able to pick up the free man, keep Mac Jones clean. He's able to deliver the ball downfield to Devonte Smith. It was a thing of beauty. So between the Smith route, the throw from Jones, and then the block from Harris, that was one play for sure that really stood out to me from this game.
It's funny you went with that. I don't even know if you remember 2 years ago, my one-play takeaway was Damian Harris picking up A-gap pressures from Mississippi State, keeping Jalen Hurts clean to, I think it was a fourth quarter drive they were behind, but very similar type of scenario there. I
don't remember that. So let's we'll have to go back. We'll go back to the tape there and see if we can pull that one up. Guys, let's go to our down the road freak shows. And we've already mentioned them a couple times, so I'll bring them up. I'll kick things off here with Clemson quarterback DJ Uiagalelei, the 6'4", 250-pound true freshman from California. Look, we were all excited to see what he would look like with Trevor Lawrence on the sideline. And Uiagalelei did not disappoint. Poised in the pocket, a little bit shaky. He was kind of running around a little bit. You see him drop his eyes. but this guy's got an absolute hose. He has got a cannon for an arm. He made some layered throws, meaning like over the corner, under the safety, along the sideline. He can make every throw in the book, and I thought he was really impressive from an arm talent standpoint in this game. Then they go into the locker room down by 2 scores, as I mentioned. I know the defense pitched a shutout in the second half, so a lot of credit to them. But give a lot of credit to Uiagalelei for coming in his first start. Tough situation. BC comes out, they punch him in the mouth, you get the turnover, but he still finds a way to get them back into this game. He runs in for a touchdown. That kind of brought some juice into the stadium. He finishes 30 of 41, 342 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mentioned the 30-yard rushing touchdown. That came on 4th and 1. So Uiagalelei, really impressive debut. I know he's gotten some mop-up duty here and there so far this season, but really, really impressive stuff from the true freshman.
Yeah, he has like a Dante Culpepper type of profile with his size. He's got some loose athleticism, huge arm, obviously. Actually, this is the first time I've seen him since the Netflix series QB1. Yeah, it's a great series, but he wasn't featured on it, Fran. He was actually a sophomore backup to Real Mitchell at St. John Bosco out in California. Really? Real had some trouble some weeks, so this sophomore out of nowhere had to come in and save the team. It was really impressive.
Where is Real Mitchell now?
He went to Iowa State and immediately got moved to like running back or receiver, and really haven't heard from him since. So I don't know where he is.
Interesting. I like the Culpepper comp too. I think he might be a little bit more explosive as an athlete than Culpepper.
But that's the type of body we're talking about here.
He is a good-looking kid.
There's a bunch of impressive performances from guys not eligible. It pained me not to go with Jalen Weidermeyer at Texas A&M, a big 6'5", 250 athletic tight end, or Ricky White, the Michigan State freshman receiver, 8 for 8, 196 yards, touchdown in their big win over Michigan. But I got to go with this Purdue receiver, David Bell, true sophomore, 122 yards and a touchdown week 1 against Illinois. What did he do yesterday? 121 yards, 3 touchdowns against Iowa. Actually flipped those. It was Iowa last week, Illinois this past weekend. But long story short, back-to-back 120-yard receiving games. He was Big Ten Freshman of the Year last year. Guys, I am just dying to see him play with Rondell Moore, because these are guys that have been just missing each other like ships in the night with the injuries, or Rondell not being healthy and on the field. But once they get active, David Bell and Rondell Moore are a great 1-2 punch at receiver. And David Bell is just a guy I don't think is really in the national conversation yet, but will be there once he gets eligible next year.
Dane, who is yours here?
I thought about maybe going with the little Tagovailoa to his brother, who put up a pretty good showing at Maryland to knock off Minnesota. I went with Zach Harrison, though, the edge defender at Ohio State. Not having Chase Young out there, it's been pretty obvious for the Buckeyes, which, to be expected. Chase Young is a special player. But I think one of the big questions was, did Ohio State have someone ready to step up and kind of fill maybe not necessarily a Chase Young role, but someone who could be a consistent pass rush force off the edge? And Harrison, he's shown flashes being able to do that. And he did so again Saturday night against Penn State when he reached the pocket. And there's the one play where he on the zone read, he reached, instead of waiting and seeing what the quarterback was going to do, either hand it off or tuck it and run himself, he just wrapped both of them up, both players to the ground, showed off that length, that power at 6'6", 265 pounds. He's a really talented player who, hopefully we'll see a little bit more development from him this season as his true sophomore year.
I mean, this is a lot to put on a guy, but Ohio State goes from Bosa to Chase Young. I mean, we're not talking that caliber at this point, right? That's too early to say?
Yeah, too early to say that, but he's still a highly recruited player who has the size, the body, the movement skills, the power. Just needs to put it all together. Those other guys, Bosa's and Chase Young, were so technically sound for young players with their pass rush sequence. Harrison's not that yet, but they've got the best defensive line coach in college football in Columbus. So hopefully we see more development this year.
All right, well, let's stay in the trenches here for our film room recap. Ben, I'll let you kick things off. I know you got an edge rusher from the SEC that you have put some work in on this past week.
Yeah, I had to dig into this kid, Brenton Cox Jr. at Florida. He was a Georgia transfer, was the number 2 defensive end in the class behind Xavier Thomas, who went over there to Clemson. Had some off-the-field issues at Georgia, got dismissed from the team. I guess, on paper, but really interesting athlete that's starting to pick up some steam on that Florida defensive front. He's a twitched up, rocked up defensive end. He's about 6'3", 6'4", about 255, explosive player, really good pursuit, burst. He works in spin moves and long arm moves, will bully tight ends at the point of attack. His hands are always tight, firm, violent. He's just a guy that makes you kind of sit up in your chair because everything is explosive. Everything is violent, from his first step, from his hand usage, from the way he impacts offensive ball carriers. When he tackles them, they go backwards and he finishes them into the turf. They're starting to work in some unique alignments on third down too, lining them up at 3-tech or having them mugged in the B gap there to do some stunts and twists. But he's a really productive player. Just the transfer issue, the off the field stuff. He's only a redshirt sophomore, so technically eligible, but a very young player. He just showed up this past week on our good buddy Mike Renner at PFF's new big board. Pretty highly touted there. I think he was somewhere in the 40s. So he's a guy that's getting some love nationally. It's a little young still, but he's a guy that has the tools, and they stand out on tape anytime you put on that Florida defense.
It's they got a bunch of guys in that front seven again to kind of dig through. So we'll go from a Power 5 school to a Group of 5 school. I want to talk about Houston pass rusher Peyton Turner. Now, I was first turned on to him just last week. Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl had tweeted about him and said he was the biggest riser so far in 2020, that through the first few games, he has gone from an undrafted free agent in the eyes of NFL scouts to a day 2 prospect. And to me, when Jim says something like that about a guy, that carries weight because obviously he's talking with people all around the NFL. So I think you look at Peyton Turner. I watched a couple of games from this season so far. I watched the Tulane game and the BYU game. He's 6'6", 270 pounds. He's got a thick, long frame. He's got an extremely high motor, and he goes full bore in a hurry. For a guy that big, he actually corners pretty well. He can flatten out and turn. He's not gonna be Vic Beasley coming off the corner, but I think he's got that ability to win the edge. He gains ground with that first step, and he's certainly got power to be able to collapse the pocket off the corner as well. What impressed me, I wouldn't say that he's got one go-to move that I'm like, oh man, he's got this one down, that he's going to be able to use this right away. But he's got a really wide array of pass rush moves, like a long list of moves that I've seen him use on tape. And none of them where they were like, oh man, like that was a really bad swim move or really bad spin move. Like, I mean, you saw a double hand swipe, you saw long arms, cross chops, club rips, push pulls, swimming inside, swimming outside. He can go speed to power, like I mentioned. So, he can get a little bit deep in the pocket sometimes. I'd like to see him counter a little bit faster. And like I said, he doesn't have that one go-to move yet. But this is a guy I think that's got a lot of potential moving forward. He kind of reminded me of I would say like a floor, like a William Golson type player who has turned into a solid starter for the Tampa Bay Bucks, maybe even like a Preston Smith. And he stands up at times for Houston a lot of the times in their base defense. So I think when you look at Peyton Turner, it's a really intriguing player. And I'm glad that Jim kind of brought him to the forefront. And I was able to watch him over the weekend. And I came away pretty impressed. I kind of liked what I saw.
Think he could be a top 100 guy like Jim alluded to?
I think he could work his way there. My guess is right now he's probably not there, but I think he could work his way there because 6'6", 270. And I don't think he's going to be a slouch when he does his athletic testing. And if he keeps producing the way he is, I think he's got a shot.
I buzzed through a couple of games too. I feel like some of his best plays, he was beating up on tight ends. He's a little stiff, kind of a limited athlete to be out there on the edge. So he's a guy that'll probably want to slide in inside or play him at 5-tech in like an odd front somewhere. Yeah, William Golson, I think, is a great comp, but he's been a pretty limited athlete in his time in the NFL. Stout, sturdy player, broad, big, powerful, but just has lacked the twitch, has really lacked the playmaking ability. But William Golson's hung in the NFL now for 6-7 years.
And he's been a starter.
He's been a reliable player, just never a guy you were really coveting with like, he's a good playmaker. So I view that, Turner the same way, but being down there in Houston, Group of 5, I'm hoping he really starts to bully, some of that competition.
We talk every spring about guys that have like high floors and then potentially high ceilings, right? And that's really that gives you that kind of safe gamble that, that gives you that confidence. I feel like he's got that high floor to be a William Golson. I'm interested to see, what's that ceiling like, with this kid. I'm interested to do a little bit more work. Dane, take us home here with a guy that we all know and love in terms of his skill set and his film study. What did you see when you watched Alabama wide receiver Jalen Waddle, I guess for potentially the last time, kind of put his eval to bed?
Yeah, I finished his eval and just talking to people, watching the film. I mean, just such an impressive player. first of all, just talking to people, it sounds like he's one of the most popular players on the team. I mean, he was at the game on Saturday against Mississippi State. His teammates love him. The coaches love him. I mean, Nick Saban comparing him to Allen Iverson and Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to hear those names out of Nick Saban's mouth, but tells you what kind of respect that he has for Jalen Waddle. And then, of course, the film is just the big question was, does he have the polish that's needed to be an early first-round pick? And I think we saw that this year. I think when you really break down his routes, and that there's no question the concepts and the scheme helped get him open, but his acceleration out of his breaks, his ability to go up and attack the football, he just looked like a much more seasoned player this year. And I know it was only 4 games, but still, I think it was enough where this guy's going to go very early, just like we thought all along. The athleticism is what carries him, but I think him showing development and growth as a receiver is certainly going to be in his favor as well. So really, it just comes down to the medicals with Jalen Waddle.
I'm really interested to see how the NFL views him, on whether he's that big play, down the field type of threat for double moves, horizontal stretching, get him in space. Like Fran and Dane, I'd love to know, 3rd and 3 in the NFL, can you throw him a slant to win against man coverage?
I think you can. And I think that's how teams are going to view him, just kind of similar how they viewed Ruggs. And I thought it was interesting. He's going to get some criticism here because he doesn't have that big resume. He doesn't have a season over 1,000 yards. If you break down his career production with Jamar Chase's career production, it's almost identical. I mean, it's kind of crazy how similar it is with catches and yards and touchdowns. And so Jalen Waddle over his career, over 52% of his yards coming after the catch. Just a really, really impressive yak type of playmaker.
Like Fran, like a Deshaun Jackson's of the NFL, Hollywood Browns of the NFL. They aren't getting slants on 3rd and 3, but they're good players, productive players. Do you see him more as a guy to beat man coverage, or you see him as just the big play guy down the field and the yards after catch like he's used at Alabama?
I mean, to me, the 3 routes that I wrote down that I was like, all right, like this is where I'm hanging my hat with Jalen Waddle. Certainly the screen, get him the ball fast. And then after that, it was deep crossing routes and post routes. Like I want him working in space, getting down the field and work vertically. I haven't studied the 2020 film yet. And hey, Dane, maybe you could speak to this. I didn't see really any reps of him against press coverage last year when I did him in 2019. It's just, I want to be able to see him in more of that role. I don't know that we necessarily got that this year, but look, at the end of the day, I mean, we've seen John Ross go top 10, right? We've seen these kinds of players go a little bit higher than expected. It's a big play league. You got to make them. You got to prevent them, right, Ben? It's all about, the long ball. And I think with Jalen Waddle, he has proven that he can be that big play guy.
It's a lot of RPOs at Bama, but not a big quick game offense. It's a lot of shot plays, play action stuff, like you just said, the deep crossers, the posts. Yep. I'm imagining most of those are probably off play action. Just wondering, where does that get you in the NFL? Yes, we've seen the John Rosses go high. I'm sure the Ravens are more than happy with Hollywood Brown as a first-round pick. So there's a place for that player. Even Calvin Ridley, I'm sure the Falcons are okay with his production being the down-the-field guy. But if they don't win for you on 3rd and short, is that okay? Can somebody else do that in your receiver room? I think it's important to kind of differentiate how you're used, what you're being asked. It's like the Panthers and DJ Moore. Can he win the underneath stuff? Probably not. But there's a place for him in the offense.
And I think people in Carolina would have said that about Robbie Anderson coming into this year. Oh, he's just a deep threat guy. He's just a deep threat guy with the New York Jets. What do? They've turned him into one of the most secure possession receivers in the NFL this year with how they're using him in that offense.
Yeah, and I think you look at Henry Ruggs last year, it'll be a similar conversation about how do you best use him. I think at the end of the day, teams are going to look at him and say, maybe this could be our version of a Tyreek Hill, a guy that we can move around the offense and is going to give us those big plays. And, I think at the end of the day, that's going to be worth a first-round pick somewhere in the top half.
So without question, Jalen Waddle, one of the scariest players in this NFL draft, if he were to come out, but one of the scariest players in the country because of that playmaking ability. Well, we're going to talk about scary players here in this next segment. We're going to go on the clock. Let's welcome in Chris McPherson. Let's talk about the scariest defensive players in this NFL draft.
On the clock.
All right, guys, excited to get things going here with another segment of On the Clock as we welcome Chris McPherson to the show. C-Mac, it's a tight one here, guys. Dane's got 3 wins. Ben's got 3 wins. I've got 2 wins. We'll see if I can really tie this thing up. And I wanted to go with a kind of a Halloween theme this week because I was coming up with the idea. It was Halloween night. I was like, all right, who is the scariest defensive player in the draft? C-Mac, I thought this would be right up your alley. I'm sure you got the kids, you got the little guys, you got trick-or-treating. But we'll go with this for this week's category.
I like it. I think you're really the one who's enjoying this. Don't put this all on me, Fran. Come on now. You're the one trying to get into the spirit as well. So
That's
this is going to be good. I just want to know, who am I going to disappoint this week? You're
going to disappoint 2 of us, and look, it's that's the nature of the beast at this point. But I'll kick things off here. I did have first pick. Dane had second pick. Ben rounds us out with the third pick after the win last week. So look. For mine, this was relatively simple. I did come down to a couple different guys I thought about, but ultimately I went with really one of the biggest freak athletes in this entire draft, and that's Micah Parsons, the Penn State linebacker. C-Mac, 6'3", 245 pounds, but this guy runs in the low 4.4s. He's going to jump out of the gym. He is an absolute locomotive in the open field. Really just a jaw-droppingly explosive, powerful athlete, and they knew it from day one. Like, I remember talking to these guys at the Senior Bowl, talking to the guys like Penn State linebacker Cam Brown and other Nittany Lions over the years, and I'm like, hey, what's the deal with this Micah Parsons? And they're like, he is just a freak athlete. Like, find the lab that he was built in, was what Cam Brown told me. And I think when you look at Micah Parsons and his skill set, if he hits you square in the hole, you are going backwards every single time. And C-Mac, I know you're out of the stage of diapers, but I think about this dealing with toddlers and stuff. When you think you might smell something, it's all right, diaper check, you lift the kid up. When Micah Parsons is coming in the hole, I just want to pause the film, pick the running back up and say all right, diaper check, you're all right, you got everything going on, because he is terrifying coming downhill. And then also just kind of taking a step back, big picture. He's also a little bit scary for the evaluator because he is a little bit raw. There's a little bit of upside here. There's a lot of projection here because C-Mac, he was a defensive end. He was a pass rusher in high school, but he was such a freak athlete that coming to the college level, they're like, we want to put you in space. We want you to be a linebacker. So this guy who once had 13.5 sacks in one game in high school, now he's going to play the linebacker position. He's only been doing it for a couple of years. He is just an absolute joy to watch. If you just want to watch a physical marvel, Micah Parsons, to me, the most terrifying defensive player in this draft because of what he is from a pure physical specimen standpoint.
Shame he's not playing this year.
I know that is the disappointing part, but he is. I mean, when you're talking who scares you the most as opposing offensive player, to me, it's Micah Parsons.
What high school did he go to where you get 13.5 sacks in the game? I'm trying to think of.
I actually take that back. It wasn't even 13.5. It was 18.5. 18.5 sacks and that was at Central Dauphin High School. Which was not too far. He also went to Harrisburg High School. That's where he finished his career. So 2 different high schools, but right in the area, right here in Ross Tucker's backyard.
All right, Ben, you're being a little quiet there in the background. Just lurking?
He's a nice, productive player. There's nothing to be too intimidated about. He's got a nice smile. He's a good kid on the field, off the field. I think any NFL team would be excited to plug him into their locker room, represented Penn State at the media day. He's a darling out there. I'm excited to see him on Sundays.
Dana, and he's freaky, but I think he was number 13 on Bruce Feldman's freak list, so – there were 12 freakier players in front of him.
We're going for scariest player. Let's be fair. We're not doing freakiest.
I know. You did say freaky, though, so I just wanted to say he is freaky, but maybe not the freakiest. So just putting that out there, too.
C-Mac, for a comparison, there were, as a true freshman, Ross Tucker told me he reminded him of LeVar Arrington, a former teammate who was the second overall pick. For Ross to throw that out there, I thought was something. And then Bruce Feldman made the comparison. Guys in the building say he's just like Saquon, another former number 2 overall pick, just in terms of the type of athlete, that explosive, physical, powerful presence that he is.
C-Mac, just to spin it to comic book land, he's like Captain America. He's a good player. He's strong. He's fast. He's productive. But nobody looks at Captain America and is afraid of Captain America. He represents the whole group. He's got the good smile. He's all American. He's a productive guy. He's getting the job done out there. But are you afraid of him in the collective lineup? I don't know about that.
Dude, I would love for you to say that to his face. That's my thing, then.
He knows where to find me.
All right, Dane, who's your pick here?
All right. So first of all, your kids aren't in the room with you, right, C-Mac?
No,
I want to make sure because I don't want to be responsible for any nightmares or anything like that in your house. After talking about Michigan's Kwity Paye. Paye is the highest ranked senior prospect in this draft. 6'3", 271 pounds, one of the fiercest pass rushers in college football. Not only does he have size and power, he was number 1 on Bruce Feldman's freak list, 4.57 40-yard dash. 34 inches in the vert. The most alarming number, 6.37 3-cone, which is ridiculous for a defensive end. To put that number in perspective, corner Patrick Peterson, when he's coming out of LSU, had one of the freakiest 3-cones we've ever seen at 6.58. So if he's able to get anything close to that, let alone below it, it just at 50 pounds heavier, just a really impressive thing to look out for. And then that not only does he have the numbers testing wise, but it translates to the game. Michigan has played 2 games so far this season. According to Sports Info Solutions, he's accounted for 16 pressures. He just took over that fourth quarter against Minnesota. The blockers had no answer for him. And then the other factor with Paye, and this might be the most important factor to consider here, is the competitive drive. I don't know if you guys got a chance to see Tom Rinaldi's piece on College Game Day about Paye and his unique backstory, but his mom grew up in war-torn Liberia, destroyed her family. She was forced to flee to the U.S., and this is when Kwity was very young, like a year old. They settled in Rhode Island, not knowing any English or anything like that. She worked multiple jobs, sent him to a private school because of the football program, and he promised her she wouldn't have to pay for college. He followed through on that promise, and now his promise is he's not going to, he wants to make sure he takes care of her the rest of her life. And so he just breaks down in tears talking about what his mom has done for him and how he wants to repay that. So when you talk about the power, the freaky athleticism, the on-field production, and then you factor in how driven and competitive this guy is, that is a scary player to line up against.
I like it. Very nicely done.
I can't believe that you're relying on the Tom Rinaldi, which was a great piece, and you're relying on the Tom Rinaldi tearjerker to try and sway the opinion of the voter.
You tell me that I watched that and I'm like, this guy is not going to let me down. And I ran down the street. I ran back. I mean, it pumped me up.
Nothing scarier than a 3-cone drill, though. I mean, there's nothing gets me all worried. It's like, oh man, there's a 3-cone drill.
If you're an offensive tackle, you're like, shoot, I got to protect the corner. He could go right through me. He could beat me in so many different ways.
Oh, good stuff there, Ben.
Well, when we're looking for the scariest player in college football, I'm going right to the biggest and the baddest. And this guy came to campus as a true freshman at 6'3", 378. 378 pounds. Unfortunately, he's down to 346, so he's trimmed up a little bit. And that's LSU nose tackle Tyler Sheldon, one of the most stout interior defensive tackles in the country. Massive player. He's big. He's ugly. He's the first off the bus type of guy. He's the tone setter. And just as a true freshman, go ahead and put on the punt return tape. He's out on special teams. Why? Because he absolutely murders personal protectors with a 10-yard head start. He's got highlight plays of absolutely putting those guys out on their butt. But he's the biggest, strongest pound-for-pound player in college football. He's not quite the juggernaut, who I think weighed in at 1,900 pounds and 9'5", a little bit under that from the comic book days. But he's a big guy. He's a bad guy. He's mean. He's nasty. He sets the tone. He's the scariest player in college football. He's the guy you want to take to the dark alley when you're alone with a flat tire. He's the guy you're calling first in the phone there, C-Mac. He's who you want.
So who's the comic book comparison?
He's the juggernaut right there. So he's not quite the same size. Juggernaut was 9'5", 1,900 pounds. So he's 6'3", 346, just a tick behind Juggernaut there, but similar type of play profile, certainly.
Dane, you're rolling your eyes.
No, not rolling my eyes. I mean, Sheldon, he's like the size is great, but I mean, it's kind of because he's got some lazy trends. I mean, there have been a lot of whispers around that program how he just, needs to be in shape, but he won't take the time to do it. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's heavy, but I'm not sure if I'm scared of that.
What 1.5 career sacks coming into the season?
Yeah, the production should terrify you. No question about it. You don't know what you're getting on the field, off the field, weight,
That's a good point.
production. You don't know what you're getting. So,
it's
the
a good point.
unpredictability about it. I know the draft rooms are terrified up and down of where to take this kid.
Oh, geez. So going into this as an undecided voter, okay, bringing the election into it. A lot of good cases. Any closing arguments? Any last rally stands?
I'm just going to say that I've got one of the craziest straight line athletes who is extremely powerful and has only been playing the position for 2 years, and his best football's ahead of him. That's all I got to say.
All right. So
Tom Rinaldi. That's all I got to say.
Tom, 2 words.
That takes it out of the equation. We could just mute Dane right there because he was setting it up nicely and everything with the pressures and number one, the freak list. I'm like, okay, I'm intrigued.
Mac, you know how those Rinaldi pieces go. They're soft, special interests. They're going to go back home, show Quiddy Pay picking daisies for the poor girl down the street.
But
go look up Tyler Sheldon there. This guy didn't need a Halloween mask over the weekend. All right,
later
big,
today,
he's bad, and he sets the tone.
C-Mac, you're going to watch it later today, and you're going to regret not picking Quiddy Pay after you watch that piece later on.
He's going to be in tears. He's going to be crying. He's going to go call his kids and tell them he loves them.
He's going to say, Quiddy Pay will not let you down. It should scare you.
Oh, love it there. But not going to go with Pay. Let's see. Who we're going now? We're going with Sheldon and Parsons here. I like – Fran using the diaper analogy about the little diaper check there in the alley, the size, speed profile, is someone that fits the, when you talk about the toughest players in the NFL, we're talking about translating to the pro game. Usually it's going to be those linebackers when you think of overtime. Think of Jeremiah Trotter in Philadelphia, of course, Ray Lewis in Baltimore all those years. You don't have really those guys because usually it's smaller guys who are thriving now at the NFL game. So a little bit of a throwback here with Micah Parsons. So, Fran, you're going to get the win here. We're going to even it up.
Tie ball game here, 9 weeks into the segment. Really, really, this is tight. I'm going to be honest, it's a little bit tighter than I thought. I thought, one of us would kind of pull away here. But I'll take the win. I'll thankfully take the win.
This is good. Little Halloween, post-Halloween theme here. So, but I'll grab the leftover candy. I'll watch the Tom Rinaldi piece. I'll cry into my Snickers bar and, have a good time. And then I'll wait for Tyler Sheldon to be mad at me for not picking him, and he'll come steal it from me.
You did this to yourself, C-Mac. Okay.
That's fair enough.
There you go.
Trust me.
You're forewarned.
As soon as we leave, I regret the decision every week. So it's, it's no different. It's going to be like me eating the 10 different Kit Kats. So, you got to try the white chocolate, the dark chocolate, the regular kind. It's like afterwards you just regret it. And you're like, I just should have.
Well, if the Eagles somehow end up with Tyler Sheldon after next year's draft, I'm making sure he knows where you are in the building.
Well, C-Mac, guys, this has been great. Really appreciate you guys jumping on once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. We'll talk to all three of you guys again soon. Before we wrap up this episode, it's really important to me one last time that I talk about voting. And depending on when you're listening to this, it's here. It's election day. And I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. Get out and vote. The lines might be long, but get out and vote. The weather might be bad. Get out and vote. Remember, the general election in 2016 was decided ultimately by just over 70,000 votes over the span of a couple of key states. And Pennsylvania, my home state, is one of those states. Just over 70,000 people. Now, I would say normally that is enough to fill a football stadium, but because of the current state of our country right now, I can't even paint that visual, right? So again, think of that number, just over 70,000. That's in the entire country. So if you think along those lines, if you see those crowds, you show up to vote, you get to the polling place and you see that there's a long line out the door, around the corner, just know, no matter who you vote for, no matter what your political affiliation is, your vote matters because in these elections, it is razor thin. So obviously, like we talked about last week, stay safe, socially distance, wear your masks, but it is your right to vote. It is your right for your voice to be heard. Get out and vote on November 3rd.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, so let's wrap this show up with our draft mailbag. And as I said at the top of the show, best way to throw us your support is going to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Write him left a great question saying he loved the discussion that we had about the two offensive tackles that were so diverse in terms of one not having the play strength but being more technically sound, and then the other having the strength but being a little bit less developed with their technique. And I believe, Will, you're talking about the conversation about Dylan Radins, the left tackle from North Dakota State, and Rashawn Slater from Northwestern. We had that conversation a couple of weeks ago here on the show. So it made me wonder if you guys could add a segment where you take two prospects who lack something the other one has that you think if you were to kind of meld them together, that it would make the perfect prospect. For instance, a corner who has strong cover skills but isn't a sound tackler, and then another who is strong against the run but needs development and coverage. So I like that. 2 weeks in a row that we're getting segment ideas from all of you guys at home. I love it. Please keep that coming. And Will, I think this is something that we can definitely do moving forward, especially once we get into the spring and we start to talk about more and more of these players. I love this idea, but I will throw you one here just for this segment. I was thinking about it. I was like, all right, what's a position we can talk about? Let's talk about off-ball linebacker. And I think you look at Micah Parsons from Penn State, true junior, who opted out, is not playing here in 2020. So you've only got really 1 full year as a starter. He was a backup as a true freshman. But this guy is a physical freak. He is huge. He runs like a deer. He hits like a locomotive. He is just a physical specimen at the position. He's great in man-to-man coverage. You line up and say, hey, guard that tight end, guard that running back out of the backfield, do your thing. This guy can do that on command. And again, just an explosive athlete, both moving forward and moving in reverse. Then you pair him with a guy like Auburn senior linebacker KJ Britt. Now, I just studied Britt over the weekend again, and I think when you look at KJ Britt, he's a big kid. He's strong. He's got some pop to him. He's instinctive. I like the way that he triggers downhill very quickly. I like his key and diagnose ability. He's just not, he's going to be a step slow, right? So I think that there's a role for that guy in the league. I think there are plenty of examples. Every team has that guy. And I think in the NFL 10, 15 years ago, he's probably a first or second round pick. But I think in today's game, that might not be the case. Some teams kind of view people that way, but not most. So I think when you look at KJ Britt, look, he's going to be a step slow. He's not going to be a guy that you want man-to-man. So I think if you take his processor, right? You take his brain and you put him inside Micah Parsons, I think now you're really cooking with something here, because Micah Parsons is a freak athlete. Like I said, you put his processing speed of KJ Britt inside the mind of Micah Parsons. I mean, you're talking about an instant blue chip player, a guy that steps in and is one of the best linebackers in the NFL, which, by the way, Micah Parsons still might be able to do that, from day one already, just because of his physical tools. But I think that would be a fun one, is if you can kind of Frankenstein there, KJ Britt with Micah Parsons, that would be a fun little combination. So great question there from you at home. We'll really, really appreciate you going on to our Apple Podcast page and leaving that review. That being said, I think that'll do it here for this early week version of the Journey to the Draft podcast. We will be back later this week. Excited to get things going as we get ready for another week of college football. We'll be back here later this week on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.